Ray Hartjen. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Rich, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story with the creative community.
Hey, the honor's mine. I appreciate what you're doing, and I'm honored to be a guest. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Really looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. Before we get started, let me give the audience a brief introduction here for you so they kind of get a feel for who you are as we're diving into this conversation. You are a musician with your two-piece acoustic band, the Chronic Padres, using music as an expressive and healing medium. You're also an author of Me, Myself, and My Multiple Myeloma, a candid memoir of living with a rare blood cancer. Your latest novel rather, which is behind me and behind you,
Yeah.
Outflank, is coming out here shortly. You're the co-author of the book Immaculate: How the Steelers Saved Pittsburgh, a longtime storyteller and media contributor with a professional trajectory spanning investment banking, pharmaceuticals, and consumer electronics, always anchoring in narrative. You're an advocate and a voice in the blood cancer community, where you publicly share your multiple myeloma journey, support patient care awareness, and you donate book proceeds to research causes, which is very noble and creative way of being able to give back in a way that's not usually the first of people's mindset and top of the list.
Yeah, appreciate that, and I appreciate that introduction. I'm always nervous when people introduce me. I was like, oh, I wonder what they're going to say, but I appreciate that kind introduction. Yeah, ultimately a storyteller. Throughout my career, I found that was kind of like a common theme of all these different pivots that I had. Now I'm kind of a full-time storyteller through primarily words and music.
Nice, nice. So let's go back in time with my only scripted question that I have, and that is, where were you born and what was life like as a kid for Ray?
Yeah, I was born in Houston, Texas, into March 1964, and I was born to a. My father was a military man. Turned out to be a career military officer. Life for me was great. I had both parents at home, which is kind of I think a rarity, right? A lot
Yeah,
of people don't have both parents, so I had both a mother and father at home when my father wasn't overseas, doing things like, fighting in Vietnam and stationed in Korea as well. So I consider myself having a great childhood. I was able to be, by having both parents around me, I was able to be a kid for a pretty long time, probably longer than I needed to be, right?
yeah,
That's one thing that I've struggled with as an adult is that we kind of force children these days to grow up so quickly, particularly children who are, maybe come from, broken homes where they're only with one parent. And I was in graduate school at the University of Washington. I was a volunteer for the Junior Achievement Program, and part of my engagement with that organization was going to fifth grade classrooms and kind of teaching them a little bit about business. And it surprised me that here I am dealing with these 11-year-olds that many of them are the surrogate parent when they get home from school for a few hours, and they're 11 years old, man. And I
yeah,
just appreciated my parents that from that point in time, letting I was immature all through college. And certainly as a young adult and in my 20s as well, so I like to contribute money, not so much my time anymore, to community, to organizations that help children, that help them be children for longer.
yeah,
That great amazement that we all had. Remember, Rich, when we were young, maybe didn't go out purposely looking to discover, but we didn't know anything, so we kind of went out there with a beginner's attitude and opened eyes and open ears, and we just learned, right? And that
yeah,
sense of discovery. And when you get kind of pushed into adulthood, you begin to think you know it all. And for those of you who are listening, not watching, I'm using little air quotes with my fingers. It's like you know it all as a teen or a young adult, and then you realize as you mature that maybe you didn't learn it. And one of the things I've learned, through my career, and certainly after my multiple myeloma diagnosis, is to, try to re-embrace that beginner's attitude and that learning mindset and that growth mindset, because there's so much out there we don't know. And that sense of discovery, that sense of wonderment. I mean, you learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot about, the context that you're in.
For sure. Were you one of those kids that would sit towards the back of the class and try to just kind of blend into the background? Or were you one of those kids that would be up front wanting to gather as much information as possible and make sure the teacher knew who you were?
I changed, and I started off as being kind of that kid in the back, that, and it wasn't, trying to hide so much. It's just like, just messing around a little bit,
Right.
and then I learned that I wanted to sit up front and be more engaged as I needed to learn, as I kind of grew up a little bit, and said, school is not for just for messing around and socializing and things like that, but it's also to learn. And I found, at the front of the classroom I was more attentive, and it was really kind of forced upon me. And in a math class, I think I was like a freshman in high school, might have been a sophomore, and I was beginning to have trouble with my vision. I wasn't seeing as well, and I needed glasses. And I'm sitting in an algebra class, and the teacher goes, "Hey Ray, help me out with this problem," or something like that. I'm like, I can't really see it. And he goes, "What do you mean? You got glasses sitting on your desk?" I'm like, "Well, these are safety glasses from woodshop. They're not prescription glasses." And he's like, "Are you telling me you can't see the board?" And I'm like, "Not really." And he goes, "How long has this been going on?" I'm like, "Well, pretty long time." And he's like, "All right, you get out of the front row. You're trading places with Ray's seat. Ray, you're sitting in the front row now." And that was kind of like this rude awakening. It's like, man, pay attention. This is our, opportunities to learn. And, here I am, a freshman or a sophomore in high school screwing around. That kind of snapped me into being in front of the guy. And so through college and through grad school, I became a front of the classroom type, not so much to like show off to the teacher, but to be more actively engaged, be able to understand really what's kind of going on, and being able to be quickly engage the professor and instructor, the teacher, by being so visible, like, "Oh, I've got a question," and increasing my participation.
Right. How about, as you mentioned, being that kid and adventurous and having that wonderment about you, were you able to experience that quite a bit in Texas in terms of the landscape and that type of thing?
Yeah, it's I'm 61 years old. I was born in 1964, and so I grew up in that era where you your mom and dad typically forced you outside, get away from the TV, and that was the dangers of a television that had 3 or 4 channels. And not the danger of a channel, a television now that there's content all over the place. So my parents pushed us outside, and having a bicycle, man, that opened up entirely new worlds, man. Now it's not only my neighborhood, but I could go to your neighborhood. I could go to maybe the next town, and things like that. So yeah, it was exploring, going through creeks and catching frogs and crawdads and things like that. And it was just what we did. Get out of the house. Had a rule. Come home for dinner. And also be in by the time that street light went on. That was the definition of dark, and that's when you're supposed to be home. Yeah, it was Texas afforded an ability to learn. But back in those days, the military moved their soldiers around more often, right? So we moved a lot. The hardship that I had was that I switched schools a lot. Every year or two. I think the
Okay.
longest I was ever in school in one spot was 3 years. So that was somewhat difficult to leave behind friends, but then then you made new friends, and opportunities to learn new communities. So I grew up an awful lot in the Midwest. There was Texas, there were stops in Kentucky, multiple stops in Kentucky around Fort Knox, uh,
Okay.
Kansas, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, Fargo, North Dakota, Indianapolis, Indiana. Yeah, grew up mostly in the Midwest.
With that experience, did with each one of those locations, there's a little bit of a landscape change and visual change. Was that something that was interesting for you, or was that something that you always felt like you were having to kind of catch up to get used to what the new surrounding was going to be?
Yeah, complicated question, because there were actually, it's not just the physical environment that we're in, but also kind of like sometimes a mental environment, right?
Yeah.
So I could move from I could move from a place like Fort Hood, Texas, which is a army community, to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and you're going from like an army community to an army community, a base to a base, and you're around similar people. But then from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, to Fargo, North Dakota, there is not a base there. My dad was responsible for a recruiting station that was in Fargo. That was civilian. So it's the difference from going from maybe military life to civilian life, right? And so there was, part of that. And, growing up in the military in the 70s, the diversity of the military, we were green is what we were, and military took care of the military, right? And, the military wasn't, that was, post Vietnam, toward the end of the 70s, the mid 70s and later. And, soldiers weren't maybe treated the way that soldiers are treated today. That was an extremely unpopular war. So, there was this collective, hey, let's watch out for each other on bases. When you're in someplace else, then you didn't really know what to expect. But then, you also talked about the geographic diversity, and like, moving from Texas within a couple of years with, a stop in Kansas and then, to North Dakota. It's like, holy smokes. I mean, North Dakota around Labor Day, all of a sudden these hockey boards start popping up. And wherever there's flat land, softball fields, parking lots and things like that. It's like, well, what's doing that? Well, as soon as it gets cold enough to freeze, the fire trucks come out, they flood the hockey boards, and you got hockey rinks. So it's like, oh, holy smokes. And, being close to Minnesota and all the lakes in Minnesota and, the things to do there, it was really cool, exploring that. And then getting a chance to move from Fargo, North Dakota to Indianapolis, the big city for me, that was another place that was, civilian oriented, but, an opportunity just to, that's the first city, real city that I lived in. And I mean, some people might not consider, if you're from New York City, you might not consider Indianapolis to be a real city. But when you're growing up in, army bases and things like that. Yeah. Indianapolis, real city. Plus I had Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And, that captured my attention even before I got there. That's one book. That's one book, Rich, you didn't mention.
I didn't, and I noticed it behind you.
Yeah, it's behind me. It's called the Indy 500, a year-long quest to win the greatest spectacle in racing. That's been kind of a passion project of mine for a long time, based on this book right here. I'm holding in my hand. This is a retro copy of a book called the Indy 500 30 Days in May. It was a book that I got in like fourth grade when I was in, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. My teacher it was, part of the Scholastic America program, and they handed out this catalog. And in this catalog, I found this great book by Hal Higdon. It was a chronicle of the 1970 race, the Indy 500. And it just captured my attention, ignited a passion for me, for the sport, for the event. And, I read that book multiple times a year for probably a decade. And I became a fan of the Indy 500. And then I had this opportunity to live in Indianapolis and actually be able to go to the Speedway for practice, for qualification, to go to a race. And that was even something even, more special for me. And, for years, I've wanted to, kind of rewrite that book as an homage to Hal Higdon and this book that got me hooked on the sport. I wanted to update it for a current race. The original book, the book I read, was a chronicle of the 1970 race. My chronicle is the 2024 race. So that book, the Indy 500, year-long quest to win the greatest spectacle in racing, it starts with the last two laps of the 2023 race and then goes through the entire year of getting ready for the 2024 race, goes through that race and then ends at the victory banquet the day after. So it's a book that I'm proud of. It was a long time coming. And it came about as a result of not only wanting to, update this book that I'd read earlier that captured my passion, but going back to my multiple myeloma diagnosis, where, there's, I started adopting some of these mottos through my learning process of being a cancer patient. And, one of them was, if not now, when? And that was, the idea of, here's this book I've been thinking about for a long time, something I've wanted to do, but man, I've got blood cancer. I've got an incurable blood cancer, a treatable but incurable blood cancer. If not now, when am I going to get around to doing this book? And so it's these kind of a motivational saying for me to put pen to paper or to pick to guitar string and do things. And also being a musician, you're always looking to increase the payout of a gig, right? Maybe you could sell some t-shirts. So I'm always on the lookout for a motto to put on the back of a t-shirt, and if not now, when is one of them.
Yeah, yeah. With traveling to each one of those different locations, each time your father was reassigned, did you also find it difficult to kind of pick up friends quickly and potentially shift you into more of a mindset of being in your own world, whether it was diving into books or maybe music became a thing for you back then that would kind of soothe that transition?
Yeah, it was difficult before school started, right? And we tended to move before schools and before
Okay.
then you have some like people around the neighborhood or whatever, and you'd be able to kind of indoctrinate yourself into there. But yeah, it was always kind of difficult to form new friendships. But it sort of depended. If we moved from army base to army base, that was
Right.
kind of easy because everybody's in the same boat, right?
Yeah.
But when we started moving, when I was a teenager, started moving to civilian communities, Fargo, North Dakota, Indianapolis, Indiana. That was a little bit more difficult, but I've always been a reader. So there was moving to a new place, not knowing anybody. What do I want to do? Mess around. I have a sister, so go outside and play with my sister, but also hit the books. My parents, they valued reading, but they really showed their value in the extensive library that we had at home. My father, who's still alive, probably I find it hard to believe that anybody else has a bigger privately held military history library than my father. I mean,
Really?
he lives in Leavenworth, Kansas, with his new wife, my new mother, after my birth mother passed away. In their house, I think there's probably 20,000 volumes. Right, that's the type of
Wow.
house that I grew up with. Is books everywhere. So this, the idea of that book, that writing is an art, right? And to be appreciated and to soak it in and to revisit it, it's been ingrained with me my whole life.
Yeah, I could imagine that vast of a library, even as it's growing over the years, but with that much information around you, I imagine that curiosity that you would have going outside to explore and do different things out there would be almost the same scenario as once you got inside the house and you
Yeah,
start
there was
looking at those.
always something to read, right? Particularly from the military history perspective, and opening up a book and reading about World War II or the Korean War. Those are times the Civil War. Those were the my father was a little less interested in reliving the Vietnam War that he participated in,
For
but
sure.
then historical westerns. And we watch a lot of cowboy movies, John Wayne movies, and things like that. But having historical Western novels and all sorts of books. So there's always something to read in our house growing up, and we were always encouraged. My dad went to the bookstore all the time. We'd go to the bookstore with him. And so my dad picking up 10 or 15 books, but he always have a little money left in the pockets for myself, my sister, and my mother to pick up a book or two each too, right? If he's
Yeah.
buying 10, we can certainly afford a couple for us, right? So we were always in books. And then there's the library, man. Rich, the library needs a marketing campaign because libraries are awesome, man. You can go into a library and you can check out books and you can read them for free, and I like going to our library, our local library. It's about a half mile away. Every once in a while, not so much to read, but sometimes just to work, just to get a change of pace, get my computer keyboard out and be pumping around there. But the library is a great place to browse around the bookshelves, get interested in some topics, check out some books. Remember back in the 70s, libraries were great places for kids.
Yeah.
We didn't have the internet at our fingertips. If you wanted to find out some things, you had to go to the library. And so, I like to talk about libraries as many, as often as I can, because there's still great resources out there for people. Go visit your library and support your library too, because it's still a great place to teach fundamentals to kids, reading, learning, getting information. The libraries are critical.
Yeah. As you were growing up, was your mom mostly stay-at-home mom, or was she able to do some work while your dad was stationed at these different bases? And
She was mostly a stay-at-home mom. Certainly, when we were younger and elementary school and maybe needed someone to be at home. Once we got a little older, she wanted to spread her wings a little bit, and she had a college degree, and so got involved in some healthcare work. I think she stayed at home for our formative years, and then as we were a bit more mature and could handle ourselves. Spread her wings out.
For sure. Is your sister older or younger?
She's younger, 2 years younger. She's a physician in Cincinnati.
Okay, nice. How about your grandparents as you're growing up? Did you have an opportunity to have them around with the traveling from location to location as your father was moving?
Yeah, my maternal grandparents were in the Houston area. They're in a little enclave called Bel Air, which is like was a subdivision or a suburb that has just been surrounded by Houston, right? So it's a little little
Gotcha.
spot inside of Houston. And whenever I was born there in Houston, so was my sister. Whenever my father was stationed overseas, we would be back in the Texas area. I remember living in Austin, for while my dad was stationed in Korea. So when we didn't go overseas with them, we would be close by, and so we'd be able to see my maternal grandparents frequently. My paternal grandparents we didn't see as often. They did winter down in Harlingen, Texas. They were in upstate New York, so we got a chance to see them. So I grew up before I like 12, at the end of elementary school. I probably had spent 8 of those 12 years in Texas. So having an opportunity to be around my grandparents, my maternal grandparents in particular.
And did any of those relatives have a creative vein within them that you may have saw growing up as well?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I haven't really thought about it until just now. And my paternal grandfather no, my maternal grandfather, my mother's father, Noyes Smith. He's a brilliant man. He was a Harvard educated in grad school. Was a oil executive for Shell Oil and as an engineer. But his artistic side was painting, both oil and water color. And also he was a great sculptor as well through
Oh,
clay.
amazing.
And you did a lot of bronze work from sculpting. I've got a fountain in the backyard that he created. So yeah, he was an amazing artist. I've got some of his art hanging on the walls. My sister's got others of his art, but that was his skill. Oddly enough, no musicians that I was aware of. I mean, there's a piano in my grandparents' house, but I never really heard him tickle the ivories too much growing up. And it wasn't something that my mom learned as a kid. So I think it was a bit more of a furniture than it was an instrument.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I hadn't thought about maybe the artistic influence. Certainly coming from my grandfather, who was a very creative person.
Nice. And you said they lived in upstate New York most of the time?
No, that was my paternal grandparents. They lived
Paternal.
in upstate New York, around Syracuse. My maternal grandparents lived in Bel Air, Texas.
Gotcha. I've got a younger sister she's been in Belmont, New York for probably 22 years, 23 years
Yeah.
ish. Her husband's family is all from that area, which is, I think it's about an hour away from Syracuse, just down from Buffalo. So if you're looking straight
Yeah.
down from Buffalo, Belmont's kind of an hour down.
They got a big horse race there every year. So
So with shifting into that junior high, high school time when your teacher recognized the fact that you had trouble seeing, did you have many teachers up to that point that were a bit more in tune with who you were and recognize maybe some assets or attributes within you that they wanted to nurture and see come to life?
not that I recognized or that they shared in a way that it became apparent to me. That example I gave with the math teacher, the algebra teacher, and the board. That was, like I said, either my freshman or sophomore year. I'm not exactly sure. But I didn't really have a relationship with a primary school teacher that kind of recognized things within me until in my junior year in high school. We had moved to a rural community, another civilian community. My father got stationed at Fort Knox, but he wanted to live off base, so he lived in our mailing address, technically Vine Grove, Kentucky, but the school was in Brandenburg, Kentucky, a rural school. I mean, I went to a school called Meade County High School, which is kind of strange. There's a high school for the entire county. When I was in Indianapolis, we used to have a county basketball tournament, right?
Yeah.
And granted, the counties in Indiana are bigger than the counties in Kentucky, but still, a bit of a culture change for me. But that in that school, I had an accounting teacher, a Mr. Stiff. I don't know if I ever knew Mr. Stiff's first name, but he was a person I think that was impactful for me, sharing that, hey, you got a talent with numbers, accounting, finance, and kind of leading me toward see what I could do with that interest.
Okay. Okay. In relation to military veterans and different things like that, I kind of have a little bit of understanding of what it's like for a service member who was in Vietnam and also Korea. I had several cousins, uncles that had been in multiple versions of each one of those wars, even World War II. I had an uncle, was my growing up, he was my dad's oldest brother. He was in World War II, earned a Purple Heart, but because he got injured for that. And I understand what the mental effects that being in the military had on family members. Was that something that you saw growing up as well? That there was quite a bit of an effect on your dad's state of mind during those times?
And maybe in retrospect, when I was young, when I was younger, for clarity, my father, when he was stationed in Korea, he fought in Vietnam first. When he was stationed in Korea, there wasn't a conflict going on. He was just stationed there. So he's not a Korean war vet. He's only, thankfully, just a Vietnam War vet. And when he first got back from Vietnam, he still had buddies over there doing tours and things. But then, for 3 or 4 years afterwards, reunite, and we'd have them over for dinner, and there'd be the stories that would be flying around the kitchen, dining room table, and as a young kid, I'd be sitting there like in amazement, and wanting to find more. And then after a few years, after everybody had kind of come home, then that stopped. There was really no more talk about Vietnam, and I think my father's in a way tried to hide from that. I learned later that he would still have nightmares. Wake up. There would be situations where maybe he's driving down the road, but seeing like a perfect ambush choke point or something like that, and tightening up around the steering wheel and things like that. So really wasn't aware of them as a kid. I just noticed that all the war stories stopped, kind of abruptly, and didn't think much about it because I'm just a young, stupid kid. But later on in life, recognizing that, having some troubles dealing with that. I don't think my dad ever went to counseling or things like that. My dad, after his retirement from the Army, went to seminary and became an Episcopal priest. And so and my dad also. While he was still in the Army, got a PhD in psychology, before he went to seminary. So I think he's probably during that process, maybe he received counseling, but also think he's well equipped to self-counsel himself as well.
Yeah, that's amazing.
A learned skill for him. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, that's an interesting trajectory and interesting course of study as well, to a better understanding, and then looking to, help others understand with going into that type of ministry.
Yeah. And yeah, so in fact, the old man on occasion still puts on the vestments, the robes, and helps out when the local parish priest in Leavenworth is on vacation. So yeah, every once in a while he's still behind the pulpit.
Right on. In high school, did you have an opportunity to have jobs and stuff like that that you would take on to start earning some money for yourself?
I had my first job was maybe the best job I ever had. I was 15 and I was a ball boy for the Indiana Pacers basketball team, and that was cool because I either sat underneath the basket or on the bench at the end of the bench for every game of the 1979-1980 season. That would be Magic Johnson and Larry Bird's rookie year, for those of you who are thinking about who that might be. So that was cool. Before that, I cut grass for money.
Okay.
After that, when we left Indianapolis and moved to Kentucky, I did not have a job, and that irritated my parents a little bit. When I was like a junior or senior in high school, they were like, here's our perfectly healthy young son who's just sitting around. They didn't tolerate that at all, so they created what married couples would call a honey-do list. And I hated lists for a long time because I'd wake up in the morning, here's a list of things to do, and one of them would be this huge garden we had. I mean, we lived out in farm country and we didn't have a farm, but we had a garden that for a kid with hand tools seemed like a farm, and so
Yeah.
I weeded that thing a lot and I tended that thing a lot. And then, through college, spending my summers in Kentucky, the farm work of throwing hay, working tobacco, all that stuff. Yeah. So, but yeah, I never had that grocery store job of stocking shelves or something like that, or newspaper route. Nothing quite that traditional. Had a couple of different other venues.
Yeah, the farm work and or just rural garden stuff being in Kentucky, I understand what that's like a little bit as well. Both sides of my family is from East Tennessee. So growing up, my mom's dad and mother had a small farm,
Mhm.
but they had a big garden every year. They planted tobacco, cut hay, all of that type of stuff. So every time we would go down for vacations in the summer or holidays, it was always part of the vacation that you ended up working
Yeah.
and doing stuff like that. So
And
it,
I mean, the work ethic of a independent farmer, man. I went those last 2 years of my high school, Rich, were at Meade County High School, and almost everybody there, is coming from a farm family.
yeah,
If their dad did work at, like, the chemical plant or what have you, they still had a little bit of a farm. And a lot of my friends in high school, quite frankly, were born so they could help out on the farm.
yes,
And that's why couples had children, is that we need people to help bring in the crops. And they work all day in the summer, and their reward, graduating high school was typically like a new car. Like, here's a 1982 Monte Carlo, brand spanking new. This is because you didn't get paid as a kid, working on the farm for your whole life. You just got your car for graduation. But yeah, hardworking folks, the respect for farmers, man, that's something that I respect and appreciate. But I could. It's a lot of work, man. It's
yeah, it is. My dad's, he had 11 brothers and sisters. So it was that exact scenario of they're just having kids to, help out. My dad didn't even go to high school. He dropped out at junior high because he had to help work on farms and stuff around the area because his dad was, doing that type of stuff, working for other farmers and different things.
mhm.
As you're getting towards the end of high school, are you starting to think about what you're going to do after? Are you thinking, I'm going to go off to college? Or are you thinking, I had this really cool job as a ball boy in Indianapolis. Maybe go back into sports arena or anything like that. What was the mindset at that point?
Yeah, college was always, we were always going to be a college family. Both my parents went to college. We valued education. My grandparents went to college, and so that was always, like, in the roadmap. And yeah, so when I'm getting through high school, already looking at colleges, halfway through high school, where do I want to go to school, and what do I want to study? And I like the idea of accounting, finance, business, investments. So, had always thought about that, once, getting to the last half of high school and you start picking your courses as opposed to having the courses pick you. Like, you got to take
Right.
English, you got to take math, you got to take civics or social studies or history or what have you. So, when I could start taking electives like accounting, I found myself going to those.
Okay. And did you stay in Kentucky for college or did you go outside of state?
I did both. I went to my first college I went to was Purdue University in Indiana,
Okay.
a university I was associated with, but I haven't spent time in Indianapolis. And I went there for a semester. I wasn't mature enough for Purdue, quite frankly. It was too big for me. And after a semester, I realized that maybe a smaller school that I considered, Eastern Kentucky University in Richmond, Kentucky, would be
Yeah.
better. So I transferred there. Still probably too immature for Eastern Kentucky University. My grades weren't great at beginning there, but then I started getting serious as the last half of college and realized that I needed to grow up and learn as opposed to just partying or whatever.
Gotcha. So was the mindset that you were enjoying the environment more than the classroom? Was that
Oh yeah, and because again, it's kind of like the start of college is in many ways kind of like the start of high school. It's like, okay, let's get the English requirement done, let's get the history requirement done, and the science requirement, and all those things that I wasn't particularly interested in. But then taking classes that I was interested in, and then recognizing the fact that hey, in a couple of years I have to leave, and I need to be able to do something,
right?
right? So let's pay attention for these courses that you might want to build a career around.
Yeah. And did you start playing music at all during that time, or was that later on in life?
I actually stopped playing music during that point in time. I started playing music a little bit when I was in North Dakota. I met a friend of mine. He's still a friend of mine. His name's Pete Johnson. And he lives in Delano, Minnesota. So Pete, shout out to you. Pete came from a musical family. His dad was a banker, but he played in evenings and weekends as a saxophone player in a band.
Oh, cool.
Pete himself picked up everything. He ended up being a professional drummer for a while, touring rock and roll band. And he got me interested. We met one day at school. I think he may have moved in maybe the same year that I moved in, and it's like, hey, you like music? Yeah, I like music. And it turns out we both liked Elvis, right? It's like, hey,
Okay.
so we joined formed a bond around Elvis, and that's when I first picked up the guitar. I played for a little while, and then kind of the guitar went away when it's the same way that people talk about scouting going away for a lot of kids. When the fumes hit, the car fumes and the perfumes, and so I kind of fell away from the guitar for quite some time. Actually, it was then I picked it up later as an adult. But yeah, started off as a kid, just idolizing pop and rock and roll musicians, starting with the King, Elvis. But I was also like, at that age, I was into Michael Jackson, the Jackson 5. I remember having Osmond Brother records and Donny Osmond,
Yeah.
these pop things. And then, discovering through people like Pete, discovering like the Eagles, and Hotel California and
Yeah.
stuff, and then, being kind of obsessed with the old AM radio, and dialing in and listening to Casey Kasem's American Top 40, and
Yeah.
then finding out, but then listening to all these album oriented radio programs, where you get those AOR album oriented rock, and learning those things and really beginning to appreciate that music. So yeah,
Mm.
lots of early influences.
Okay. And then with seemingly maths is your basically your strong suit. It's what it's sounding like going into college and starting to figure out what kind of thing you want to focus on. Did you have any intention after moving through college of what you wanted to do?
Yeah, I was fascinated with the world of investments and thought, that's, to make money with money, and so I was like, yeah, I want to be in investments. So that was the idea. So, took a lot of, financial accounting for the accounting aspect of it. And then, financial investments.
And then what was your first job after once you graduated college?
My first job was in investment banking as a stockbroker, and telling stories, retail, selling retail stocks, and I didn't enjoy it as much as I wanted to, because that's anybody who knows in the brokerage business it's not finance, it's really selling, and I wanted to do more of the finance and the financial analysis, so I ended up changing, pivoting, pretty quickly into kind of investment training, both for aspiring stockbrokers who need to pass licensure examinations, Series 7 and Series 63 exams, but also for just people, the public, who want to know what's the difference between a common stock and a preferred stock, or a municipal bond and a government bond, and the
Right.
like. I found that to be much more interesting, and then trading on my own accounts as well, and being able to do finance from that perspective.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I'm assuming this is still in your mid-20s ish that you're
Yeah,
doing this transition.
going through my mid 20s, and doing that, and doing a lot of traveling associated with it. I always kind of felt as though something was missing, and I was having, as we're, at this point in time, what we're looking at is, the late 80s. And, I was having friends that were doing things. They were like working with self-directed work teams, and I know the idea of that consensus decision making, a lot of these Japanese, business, principles and philosophies, and that I found to be really interesting. I was like, man, I want to do something like that. But I kind of viewed myself as a factory that was ill-equipped, that was, needed new machinery, right? I
Yeah,
needed to retool my factory. Here I was with financial analysis, things like this, but I got interested in these like self-directed work teams and organizational development. I thought, man, I need to retool myself. I need to go back to school. I need to go to graduate school. And so, as I began to learn about a discipline called organizational development, there's one of the founding fathers of that applied science was a man named Cecil Bell. He was on the faculty at the University of Washington. And I'm like, dude, I'm going to go to the University of Washington. I'm going to learn from Cecil Bell. So that's what I did. I retooled myself around the concepts of organizational development. And, from grad school there, moved into consulting, because everybody in 1993 who graduated from an MBA program pretty much went into consulting. So went into consulting, then transitioned into a human resources role internally with an organization, and that's rich. When I began to start realizing that really I was in a storytelling component. So
yeah.
that was part of my like whenever I did an organizational assessment, we'd sit back there and we would listen, but then we would tell the story back, to the organization. And it happens all the time in human resources as well, telling the stories and engaging with employees, from internal and human resources into organizational development internally, into a training component. That's always storytelling. And as I began to transition through my career through the decades, it was then I got into marketing, because marketing is kind of like the ultimate in storytelling. Corporate communications, the same thing as storytelling. Public
Yeah,
relations, it's the same thing as storytelling. It's
yeah,
something that as humans we're in. It's kind of an inherent need. We beg our parents and our babysitters or whatever. It's like, tell me a story,
yeah,
and that's the kind of the way to engage. And so I didn't really articulate in my head, working in investment banking, of like, here's how you engage people by telling stories, compelling stories. But in a way, that's what it is. You're telling, whether it's you're trying to, solicit an investment into a security, or training somebody, they to get the message across, telling the story. But then kind of, working through, all these, things that dealt with interpersonal communication as a transferable skill. Ultimately, it has its roots in storytelling.
yeah, absolutely. And that's it. If you haven't picked it up yet, that's kind of how I'm trying to navigate your storyline in terms of finding touch points that is basically establishing where you are currently in life, and the things that have affected you, the things that have made imprints on you, and that kind of thing. And you're absolutely right. Storytelling is across the board one of the most realistic and highly engaged, effective ways of communication, whether it's in any industry. and it's across the board as well. If you can tell a story, get people wrapped into that story, then you've got them consistently engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all desire it. It's the best way of, of receiving information. It's the best way of learning. Is having, you need to have that effective story for engagement, and you find it everywhere. You can find it from a stand-up comedian who's telling a 15-second joke
Yeah.
to somebody who's created a 2-hour-long movie and everything in between. A book that takes 12 hours to read. It's stories are everywhere, and some of my favorite stories are little 3-minute and 27-second stories that we call songs, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, stories are cool, man.
And over the course of figuring out that you really enjoy the storytelling component, at what point do you start to move back towards music and start to realize that this is the thing that I really want to try and craft and hone a little bit? Was it music or was it the books first?
It was music first. I'm an extrovert. I like being in front of people.
Yeah.
I don't need to be the center of attention, but I'm comfortable in being the center of attention. And I found myself, for like a 7-year period of time being in an organizational development role with Sony Electronics, of being in front of people, either, working with them on solutions to some organizational problems they have in their team, their business unit, or whatever, or with training. And that was just me up in front of people, standing and engaging. And I liked that. But I've always been interested in music. And then I started wanting to, spend time, away from work, just playing music. But quickly, as I began playing music, it's like, well, I want to, like, hey, to my wife Lori, check this out, and then to my friends, and I'm like, what I really want to do is perform. I don't want to learn music. I cannot read music to this day. There have been times in my life where I have read music, but I've forgotten it because I don't do it. I don't want to read music. I don't want to know music theory. I want to play songs, right?
Yeah.
So when I got back into the guitar again, I just started self-teaching myself. Forget notes and chords. I'm looking straight to tabulature music, where it tells you on this string, put your finger on this fret, and begin to play songs and put notes and chords together in that way. And so I started playing songs, and then it's looking for people to play music with, forming bands, and being able to either, first of all, play in garages and play together, and then let's play in front of people and do that. So yeah, that was kind of like the musical journey. First was filling up some time because I wanted to re-explore that music ability, but music having always been a big part of my life, man. I love going to live performances. I always have, I don't have talk radio on in my car. I have music radio on in my car, singing along to songs, playing, playing drums on the steering wheel,
Right.
air guitar and things like that, and so I've had a keen appreciation for music, really since even before I met my friend Pete. Pete got me into playing music. But before that, I was still listening to music. With the old record player, and
Yeah.
joining Columbia House Record, club, and and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the music came first, and then it was just a natural evolution of, I want to learn more songs. I want to play songs. I want to create my own songs and write my own songs and record my own songs, and it's just been kind of an evolution and a growth process to do that.
With the way that you're describing this fascination with starting to shift back into music through storytelling, which you found was kind of an easy calling for you in the business world, was gravitating towards that storytelling component. Do you recall any specific book in your younger years based on this library that your father was creating that may have really impacted that or imprinted that, whether subconsciously or consciously, in your mind?
I can't remember a book from my youth. I can remember a book from my professional life. It's probably around the year 2000. So let's put me at my mid 30s. It was a book called The Creative Priority. Forgotten the man who wrote it. But I saw him talk at I believe it was a Tom Peters conference in San Francisco, a leadership conference. But he was one of the, I think he was the guy who started the Nissan Design Center in San Diego. And
Okay.
so if you're old enough to remember, like one of the things they came up with is like bulleted thermos. That was like all the rage, like in the late 90s, and you'll find them in a Starbucks or something like that. This Nissan design. But he wrote a really interesting book, and it was just about it called The Creative Principle, or The Creative Priority, I believe is the title of the book. And that, got me to lactically thinking in that creative way. And I'll give one example that this guy provided in his book is that when they hired people at Nissan Design, they would hire people that were divergent personalities and creatives on purpose, right? They'd hire like, like this guy that might be like a, type B type of person. And then this person would be a type Y type of person, and bring them together into the fold. And they would keep doing that as they hired people in couples, because they wanted people to be wildly creative, to be able to look at things in a different way, but then you'd be able to work with one another to be able to come to maybe a happy ground. What can I learn from you, Rich? What can you learn from me? How can my idea be morphed into a little bit like your idea, and then we come up with something even better, right? And about the same time I read that book, I was introduced to the people at IDEO, which is a design firm in the Bay Area, San Francisco and in Palo Alto, and those guys are just flat out wacky because they're supposed to be wacky. They're and having this creative energy just kind of run free, and break us out of our pastimes, and that kind of morphed, by reading this guy's book, The Creative Priority, by meeting these people from IDEO, at the same time dealing with in the early 2000s with my professional career, doing a lot of change management, and there's a lot of change going on in the world from like an analog world to a digital world. There was, the geopolitical aspects, 9/11, just a ton of change. And, when you work with an organization who is, I was with Sony at the time, and, working with an organization that has such a rich history and success, but also needs, is facing a new frontier. How do you change? And part of that is that creative aspect, and overcoming some of these great strengths you might have, like perseverance and so forth. Perseverance is a great quality, but if you misuse perseverance, what does that do about resistance to change, right? And so having these kind of these formulas to help you think creatively, and knowing that sometimes you need these creative solutions, to be able to move change and to go forward. So they kind of like all merged together. I haven't really articulated this in my mind before until just now. It's kind of all merged together at the same time and gave me this increased desire to not only express myself in different ways, be it through writing or through music or what have you, but also to after I've expressed myself, is what can I create? What can I do that's new? And go from a playing somebody else's songs to saying, hey man, I want to write my own songs. And how do I get started with doing that? And then pushing forward with that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Fascinating from the perspective of what that title represents to begin with, especially for the creative community, being the creative priority. And it's fascinating that as you're telling and sharing your story, these different industries that you're pivoting into, it is allowing you to have realizations about how you want to move forward as well. And then, you find this book that changes the way that you're starting to look at things as well, and see that you can prioritize creativity and move that up the ladder in the chain of business development, business operations, different things of that kind of element.
Yeah, it takes that creative impetus to transform and to
Yes.
grow exponentially, right? If you kind of just do the same old things, you have this incremental type of thing, and
Right.
incremental sometimes works. If you're working for say a utility company,
Yeah.
that's well, then you can probably think about incremental growth and incremental change. But if you're working in software, you got to think transformative, right? And
Right.
you've got to take big leaps, and you need a catalyst, to really spur that on. Yeah, it's that creative aspect of it. You need to be creative for exponential, for transformative. And there's you don't need necessarily be creative, for the incremental, but that's the danger that you might fall into if you kind of make every Monday be just like Monday. That
Yeah.
previously you end up with maybe the same types of results, and for whatever perspective you want, but certainly from a commercial perspective, a commerce perspective, you have to be careful of too much of the status quo. It feels really good, but when somebody makes that change, then you have to play catch up. And a great example I can give right now would be like in the software as a service space. There's a change of a way that buyers are going to market, and what they want now is to self-service a lot of their buying journey, and a lot of that includes transparent pricing available on the web. Right?
Yeah.
That's not how
Yeah.
SaaS companies sell software. They haven't forever. The process is pretty simple. It's like, do you like our content? If you like our content, we've got some really cool content that you can look at, but you need to give me your name, your email address, and your phone number. And then you're for sure going to get called, an email. And then, in time, we'll negotiate a price. That's gone out the window, Rich,
Yeah.
but that was, that's the status quo. And that's how these SaaS companies have done it for decades. Now, all of a sudden, it takes one person in your industry to say, you know what, Rich, that's our pricing right there. Take a
Yeah.
look at it. In fact, we have a freemium model. You can try the
Right.
product for free. You can have a trial. Here's our pricing. You don't need to call us. Just sign up. Leave a credit card. We'll do business today. As soon as one person does that in your segment, you have to do it to even compete. So yeah, it's that creative aspect of how can we do things a little bit different? How can we do things different from our competition? Because if we do it right, we'll create a competitive advantage.
Yeah. Absolutely. As you're moving into these industries and you're starting to feel into that mindset a little bit more of being creative, storytelling, and moving forward to potentially thinking about your first book. How did that come about, and what was the initial thought of, I think I'm going to write?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's this desire to keep expressing myself, right? And how can I express myself?
Yeah.
And my life is on its train tracks of trajectory of going wherever I kind of thought it was going until March of 2019, when I was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. And
Okay.
for those of you out there in the audience aren't familiar with multiple myeloma, first of all, you shouldn't be. I wasn't familiar with it until I became diagnosed with it. It is a blood cancer, relatively rare blood cancer. It's incurable blood cancer, but treatable. And so all of a sudden, bam, there I am, 54 years old. I think it's 19 days before my 55th birthday, and here I have cancer, right? I'm like, well, you know what? I'm going to be the best cancer patient there can be. There tends to be with multiple myeloma a induction period of therapy, immunotherapy and chemotherapy, and then you go through a stem cell transplant. That's kind of like the roadmap. Stem cell transplant is going to be like, my doctor says 3 to 6 months. After diagnosis, I'm like, you know what, Rich, I'm going to overachieve, just like I overachieve everything. I'm going to do it in 3 months. Hell yeah. And so I'm working out, I'm eating well. I'm doing this as the best as I can until about 12 days later. It was less than 2 weeks. Less than 2 weeks. I'm sitting out at dinner with Lori, my wife, and our son, Raymond. And I was exhausted, man. I couldn't even read the menu. I remember where we were at. We're at PF Chang's, and I'm like, I'm just exhausted. And I was physically exhausted, but I recognized in the moment that it wasn't the physical. I was physically exhausted because I was mentally exhausted.
Okay.
That I had woken up every morning since my diagnosis, like a week and a half previous, thinking about cancer. And I had gone to bed at night. The last thing I was thinking about, Rich, was cancer. And then a lot of times, most of the time, maybe during the day, I was also thinking about cancer, and I was, what can I do to fight this as best I can, and that's when I was able to. It dawned on me. I was able to articulate that my being is more, my whole being, Rich, is more than my physical being. And it's more
Right.
than my mental being. I recognize there's this emotional component, there's this spiritual component. And, being a musician, familiar with a, mixing board, it's like, I can change levels here. And, I started thinking about this again, relating back earlier to our conversation, this sense of discovery, right? And learning. And, I'm like, wow, I am more to my being than just my physical and mental self. There's this emotional component, spiritual component. I recognize that if I'm strong in one area, I can lift up maybe some of those components that are weaker. And likewise, I also need to be aware of the danger that if I have a weak area, that can maybe drag down one of my areas of strength. So like I was probably physically fine, but I hadn't taken care of my mental and emotional and spiritual needs. It was dragging my physical, ability down. So I thought about that and said, what else can I learn about this as I fight cancer? Well, I just learned this about myself and I was able to articulate in my head. What else can
Yeah.
I learn? And so I kind of quickly went to a exercise that I had facilitated for people, many times for hundreds of people, but I probably facilitated the exercise a good 10, 15 times. And it's a timeline exercise. So all you folks along the audience, this is super fast. You're going to work with this timeline exercise. I'm going to facilitate this timeline exercise with you.
All right.
You don't need a pencil and paper. If you have one, that's great. But if you don't, you can just do it mentally because it's fairly simple. That is, you just make a horizontal line from left to right. And at the far left-hand side, you make a little vertical tick mark. And the far right-hand side, you make a little vertical tick mark. Now, revisiting that tick mark on the left-hand side, you write the letter B. That represents your birth. And because you guys are so much smarter than me and you're way ahead of the curve, you already know what the right-hand side is. You're going to put a little letter D there. That's going to be your death. So, Rich, now comes the introspective part. Now you go, where do you believe you are on your timeline? That what you just drawn out there is the timeline of your life on this planet, man. And where do you believe you are? And I know intellectually you might think, well, none of us have tomorrow promised, right? But where do you believe? Where do you feel, right? And when I was facilitating this, Rich, I would always just kind of haphazardly throw a tick mark right in the middle. I was going to live forever. And I was certainly going to live to be 100. Keep in mind, when I'm revisiting this, I'm a newly diagnosed cancer patient. I'm age 55. And I'm thinking to myself, Ray, if you're truthful to yourself, you're no longer in the middle where you've been putting yourself for years. You're much further to the right than where you are. Now what? Look at that and what does that mean to you? So, again, embracing this growth mindset was, well, I think, like a lot of people, I've been guilty for too long for taking time for granted. I looked at that and said, I took all tomorrows for granted.
Yeah.
Next week's and next year's. And I was one of those guys, sometimes next decades. I was one of those people, Rich, that would say, one day, ... One day I'm going to write a song. One day I'm going to record an album. One day I'm going to, sail around the world or whatever. And I realized, like, hey, man, I think I take time for granted. And that don't make me special. I think a lot of people take time for granted.
Oh, yeah.
But then I'm not stopping there. Growth mindset, baby. Discovery, learning. What does taking time for granted, how does that manifest itself in your life? It's like, oh, that's simple. I can answer that really quickly. Because I take time for granted, I also tend to take people and relationships for granted. Why? Because there's time, right? I might be thinking about my dear friend Rich in Michigan. Rich is going to be there tomorrow. I won't be there tomorrow. I'll just give him a call tomorrow. I'll text him next week. I'll send him an email a week after week, for sure next month. And I think we're all kind of guilty of that. We just kind of like let these, we take these relationships for granted. And sometimes we lose touch with people because we take time for granted. So now getting back to our earlier conversation, Rich, and to finally address your question, musician wanting to make a few extra bucks, man, if I can sell a t-shirt at a gig for $20, if I sell 10 t-shirts, I make more out of t-shirts than I do from the bar that's paying for me, right? And so F not now, win. Let's put it on the back of a t-shirt. That was like a motivational saying for me. F not now, win. I've got blood cancer. Now I'm going to fast forward to my friend Tom Olenek. He's a Yinzer. That's a guy who's from Pittsburgh. And he loves his town, man. And he's had this hypothesis for years that, Pittsburgh had to go through a very painful deindustrialization transformation, built around the steel industry. to something else when the steel industry hit hard times. And they came out of that deindustrialization transformation smelling like a rose. You know, Pittsburgh is viewed as a new economy success story. It all the time hits place these lists of most favorable places to live and best cities to live and things like that. You know, they're renowned for healthcare, technology, academia, so many things. You know, the city of Pittsburgh has prospered where a lot of its Rust Belt cousins, Detroit, Cleveland, Akron, Gary, Indiana, you know, they've sometimes maybe struggled a little further. In Tom's mind, it was because when the city of Pittsburgh needed heroes, they could look no further than just Three River Stadium and the Pittsburgh Steelers. And that, you know, this team that had been horrible for 39 years of their existence, all of a sudden became good. And they were a mirror of the community. You know, they were blue collar, take a shower after work, not a shower before work type of people, right?
Yeah.
And Tom would talk about this idea of this book. He talked about it with his friends for 20 years. I hadn't known him for 20 years at that time. I had known him for about 15, but he had told me about it. This would make a great book. So one day, Rich, I just grabbed him by the shoulders and I said, dude, if not now, when? You're talking about something that happened almost 50 years ago. How about I can write? How about I start the book? And if we should ever veer off of your vision, we'll just course correct. Well, excuse me, a year and a half later, we hadn't veered off vision at all. We ended up with a book. It's a book I'm super proud of. It's called How the Steelers Saved Pittsburgh. This is my first book. This book is, I'm super proud of the book. I'm super proud of the fact that, you know, as I'm taking the principal writing on this, Tom is like, what can I do for you? And I'm like, you know, I don't know. I don't need to do anything for me because I got an idea. How about if we donate writers' proceeds to the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, Hillman Cancer Center? And so far, we've been able to donate $7,064 to the Hillman Cancer Center because of this book and the promotion that we've done around it. It's a super cool book. It's got a little something in it for the history buff as well as for the sports buff. We kind of weave the stories together, and I'm super proud of it. But that was, you know, that came about, Rich, strictly by living that motto: if not now, when? And then that's led to the book behind your shoulder. The book I'm holding up right now is my fifth book, my first novel, and it all, you know, steers back again to if not now, when? Just things I want to do, you know, and revisiting my timeline. What is it that I want to accomplish, and who do I want to accomplish it with? Who do I want to bring along for the ride? Who are the people I love the most, that mean the most to me? And you know, I hope for the audience that's, you know, stuck around this long for the episode is that, you know, I hope that's, you know, something that you can take back to yourself. You know, don't wait for a serious health condition to be diagnosed to maybe, you know, take an introspective moment and reflect on your life and what you want to do, right? You know, maybe use that timeline exercise for yourself, and then you know, you ask yourself questions around it. What does this mean for me? You know, how does this manifest itself in my life? And then, you know, maybe you come up with your motto of you know, if not now, when, or some derivative of it to spur you on to accomplishing what you want to accomplish with the people that you love the most.
Yeah. I appreciate that, Ray. I appreciate you taking that moment and sharing that perspective just on that little exercise in assessing. I think many times as Americans, and even narrowing that down into the creative community, we have a tendency to put things off and put them off and put them off. And we don't take enough action to do certain things that potentially could change the trajectory of a whole lot of things within our life and within our communities, especially within the creative community.
And, you know, one of the things, it struck me when you said that. I'm looking at one of my noodling books. And this is, it's, you know, maybe you put off some of the creative aspects. Maybe, you know, for me, a lot of times it's putting off parts of the creative aspect. You know, just yesterday, I wrote down like a verse, you know, and, you know, so like I got a little part of a song. I got a little part of about 400 different songs, right? You know, at what point in time do you take, you know, a little of this one with a little of that one, and a little bit of that, and a sprinkle of this, put it together and finish your song, right?
Yeah.
So I find that particularly with music, you know, is you know, finding bits and pieces, but being neglectful sometimes of, revisiting some of these past pieces and seeing, let's flush this out a little bit. There was something that caught my attention to begin with, right? And so let's kind of dig, scratch it a little bit more at that and see what else might kind of flow out of it. And writing music, for me, it's one of two different ways. One is you noodle on the guitar and write a riff, and like, what does that sound like? Oh, that sounds like a day at the beach, and then the words come from that. Or it's the other way around, where I'm thinking about some words. I'm like, oh, it's a day at the beach. Is what I'm going. Well, what's the music that fits the day at the beach? And then
Right.
get that up. So for me, it's a couple different types of approaches. I think for other people, there might even be more. But let's explore some of these ideas that you have. It's kind of like dreams. Sometimes you struggle to remember your dream.
Right.
And you kind of have to kind of claw at it a little bit. It's like, wait, there's that one part, but what led to that part? And there's something there. And it's I think for all creatives that struggle, it's kind of scratching away at it, something or itching. Yeah, scratching away at the itch that you have. You've had something, something that popped into your brain, popped into your ear, or whatever. It's a bit of an itch. So you start scratching and seeing what comes from it. Hopefully, it's not a nasty infection. Hopefully, it's something
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and that's the thing. I think always jotting stuff down, keeping it jotted down, whenever it comes to your mind, put it down for sure. Start it at the very least, but always come back to it. Always come back to it
Yeah.
because eventually it's going to develop into the thing that it's supposed to. Because I don't believe that ideas are just given to us because I believe they're I believe they're inspired as creatives. I believe we're given ideas and information from the creator, the ultimate creator, the one who gave us this life. And we have the abilities of the creator because we're doing these creative things. So I think they're always dropping in as information and ideas. And then
Sometimes it takes hard work to get through to it. Sometimes it's super easy. Sometimes it's like, bam, here's the whole
yeah,
thing, right? And whether it's a meal that you're preparing in a kitchen, a song, a chapter for a book, an entire book, or whatever. Sometimes it's just like this easiest thing. It just flows. Other times, you have this like burst of inspiration, this creative energy, and you really got to like push it out, right? And you end up changing courses a lot. It's like, this is the direction it's going. And then, based on, just noodling around, feedback from others, whatever, then maybe it kind of curves this direction and so on. And I think that's part of the creative process that I enjoy, but also is a challenge, right? It's when you do have to kind of claw away at it. And, I tell a lot of aspiring writers, they're like, I got an idea for books. Great. And that's step number one, right? You need to have an idea, but step number two is you got to write. Sooner or later, you got to write, and sometimes that's I don't know really get started. Well, start at the beginning. To literally start at the beginning. Start typing things out. It does not take long. For those of you people who want to write a book, books these days are a lot shorter than they used to be, a lot thinner. I know when we were first publishing Immaculate, the manuscript came in at 133,000 words and change. And the publishers we were talking to were like, that's too big. We got to cut it. And it's like, well, that's the story. We don't want to cut it. So that's too big. Nobody buys books that big. And I picked up a copy of War and Peace from Tolstoy on my desk. And I'm like, this book's 1,000 pages long. And they're like, you're right. It is the classic Russian novel. It's a masterpiece. And you know what? Nobody buys War and Peace anymore. They buy little thin books, and I'm like, oh, a point well taken. We fought. Our publisher for Immaculate, Morgan James Publishing, I think we turned it into maybe 130,000 words. There's a couple of small little anecdotes. One anecdote about Roberto Clemente, and one anecdote about Iron City beer that did not make the final cut. You can read those on my website if you'd like to. Books are not as thick as they used to be. A average length of say like a nonfiction book might be around 60,000 words, something like that. I'm kind of taking the middle of the range. 60,000 words, man. If you write 500 words a day, you've got a book in 120 days. That's start. So if you're an aspiring writer, start. It doesn't have to, you don't need to sit down and write all 60,000 words in one day. In fact, your book will be a hell of a lot better if you don't. But 500 words really isn't that much. If you have difficulty writing 500 words, maybe the idea isn't there, or maybe it's not a book, maybe it's a short story or an article or something like that. It's a little bit different. But yeah, get started and work your way through it.
One of the things that I want to see if this had any effect on your state of dealing with the early stages of this diagnosis. Because as you were talking about sitting there at dinner, you were feeling fatigued, and not only fatigued physically, but also mentally. And then that transitioned into you moving into your first book. Once you started doing that, was there maybe a leveling out of the way the physical anomaly was taking place on the body versus this creative component that's coming into play now? Is it maybe giving a little bit more of that energy boost that all the treatment may have been wearing on you?
Yeah, it was the awareness of taking care of my whole being, and one aspect of my whole being could affect the others either positively or negatively. So I'll give you an example. Working out and exercising. That gives me strength and energy. It also makes me feel good, right? Mentally. And that gives me the energy to go to the grocery store and source nutritious foods and prepare nutritious meals, which in turn feeds my body and fuels the next day's exercise and activity. So it's being able to do open up your mind and taking care of the needs that present themselves, right, and not neglecting needs that you have. And so all of us as humans have these diverse range of needs, and they cover a wide variety of topics, and a lot of times we push it aside, right? It's like, oh, I'm too tired to deal with that or whatever. One of the things I learned with having a chronic condition, multiple myeloma, incurable condition, is that it is every day. It doesn't take a day off.
Right.
I can't afford to take too much time off. There are times when it's like, I just need to, not think about this. Yeah, you can do that, but a cancer patient with a chronic disease can't do that for long. They've got to
Right.
keep moving forward. There was, when I went through my stem cell transplant, one of my attending physicians was telling me, as you recover, don't look at things day by day, right? Because you're going to have good days and bad days. But look at things from a trend line week over week. Is this week better than
Okay.
last week? And that message really kind of resonated with me for a lot of different aspects of my life. What's the trend line? There's, don't be too micro in your analysis of yourself, or your assessment of yourself, to have a little bit of time so you can see what those trend lines are, because there are going to be some ups and downs. And I thought that was an insightful thing, from a physical conditioning, recovering from a stem cell transplant. But it's something I like to use. And there's times when I can sit down and get a lot of writing down. There's other times when I need to take a nap. The treatment makes me tired, Rich. I probably nap 5 days out of the week, and certainly the days after treatment, immediate treatment, yeah, I'm just tired.
Right.
And I need to take care of that. I have to take care of that. I can't sit around and just push my way through the guitar strings or push my way through a keyboard to try to get some work done when I'm just tired, fatigued, right? So you got to take care of the physical aspect, take that nap, and hopefully re-energize himself. That I did want to share another motto with you in the audience. If not now, when? Once you sell some T-shirts at gigs with that on it, you have some other T-shirts. It led me to a motto that I use today a lot, and that's punch today in the face.
Nice.
And the idea of punch today in the face is, if today was personified, how do you get today's attention? And if any of you out there in the audience have ever been punched in the face, that's a way that snaps you to attention pretty quickly. You're not thinking about a whole lot of other things. You're like, what?
Yeah.
And I just wanted today to know that I was here. I want to use today up, write it hard, put it up wet in the barn. So when I'm sitting in bed at night, I can say I've used up today, and I can point to tomorrow and say, tomorrow I'm coming for you next, and punch today in the face for me is, it kind of fits in with my personality. It's like, today is a gift, Rich. And we know intellectually that not everybody received today as a gift. So how do we honor those people? how do we honor the day? And maybe most importantly, how do we honor ourselves? We have this opportunity today. What do I want to get accomplished with it? These are things that I want to do. Going back to my timeline again, what do I want to do? Who do I want to do it with? Let's make it happen. All the other little stuff in life will fill in around the edges. There'll be time to pay the bills or whatever. Do some of that stuff. But if I want to perform at this brewery, let's get my set list together and let's rehearse these songs, right? And if I want to write this song, let's finish writing the song. If I want to record this song, what do I need to do to get from where I am now to be able to sit in and record it. And the same thing goes with writing. It's like I wanted to try a novel. I've written 4 nonfiction books. I said, this is a challenge. I wonder if I can write a novel. So I did. And I don't know if it's any good or not. I appreciate you volunteering to read one of the advanced reader copies. I don't know. Will there be a second novel? It all depends on what Rich and other people think of the first novel, right? So we'll see what the reviews come about. But I wanted to take a shot at it. And so, but the first thing you got to do is sit down and actually get to work and seize the day and punch the day in the face and make the most of it. This book I started in November of 2024. It's been finished for a couple of months now. It comes out in October of 2025. It's been less than a year, and available at wherever fine books are sold. So
nice. I imagine it's not going to be too difficult to be able to move into another one after this. And the reason I say that is because of your storyline already. You're a storyteller. You have been. You've been influenced by story since you were young with those books that were in the family library.
Yeah.
The movement that your family took from location to location because of, wherever your dad was getting sent to be stationed. Going back and forth into all of these different communities was creating stories for you all along the way. And then, you transferring that into the books that you've written that are true story related. I don't see any way possible that it would be not something that you could do to create another fiction novel.
In fact, I've already started. So I'm a 50 pages into a sequel to the book. And then I've got ideas for other ones too, right? So both nonfiction and I'm working on a couple of projects right now, business books, nonfiction book, and then maybe a sequel. We'll see if I finish the sequel. Because I'm serious. I really respect a Bay Area musician. His stage name is Fantastic Negretto. And he was a musician, R&B musician, working out of LA until he wasn't. All of a sudden, some things happened in his personal life. Yeah, he was also involved in an automobile accident. Sales weren't going particularly well, so he moved back home to Oakland and he started raising like roosters and chickens and selling weed and also reinventing himself as a musician into a blues artist. And what he would do is he would go down to the BART station. BART is Bay Area Rapid Transit. It's the train station around the Bay Area. And he would play his new music. And he would, with his ideas, if I can stop somebody on their morning or afternoon commute and engage with them through music, I might be onto something. Well, he might be onto something. He's won 2 Grammys for blues in the last decade or so, and I love the way that he experimented with it. Like, am I onto something? By asking people what they thought. Am I onto something or not? And he literally didn't ask. He just watched and observed. I want to play the music, and if it resonates where I captured them for just a second or two, then maybe I'm onto something. And I love that idea. So, that's why it's in the back of the book, outflanked. It asks you in the author's notes to please leave a review, because your reviews are going to let me know whether I need to, pursue this storyline a little bit further and pursue this creative pursuit. I do that with music. I've begun to put more music online now. Just, maybe a month ago, put out a single that I wrote. Just a rough acoustic demo. I'm very self-conscious about my voice, but I just want to invite people. Tell me, is this a song that has any merit Do you think I should professionally produce it for myself? Do you think maybe I should sell it to somebody else for them to produce or what have you? So I like that idea, inspired by the fantastic Negretto, to open it up to the community, let the community tell you.
Sure.
It's nerve-wracking because you don't want to hear it. Hey, Ray, that sucks. But that's part of life as a creative, man. Sometimes you hit it and sometimes you don't. Ultimately, we do it for our self-satisfaction, right? And that peace of mind and joy that comes with it.
That's it right there. And I want to drop in something that Rick Rubin has said across the internet, and that is for every creative is don't make stuff for an audience. Make it for yourself, and the audience is going to find you because ultimately they're going to buy into you versus what you're creating.
Yeah, you have to be true to yourself. You have to like it. You have to have the pride in it, right? You need to be proud of your work. And so, it definitely has to speak to you first. And, there are people that, I do remember, probably, close to 30 years ago, remember Moby producing an entire album with the idea of, I want to license each and every one of these 11 songs to commercial enterprises and make money that way. And he did. Right. I thought that was a kind of a unique thing. It's like, I'm making this commercial on purpose. I'm sure he also followed the thing like, by the way, I'm also proud of this song. I like the way we composed it and all that. But I haven't heard much from Moby lately. Maybe he made so much money off of that he hasn't needed to worry about producing music for others, because now he can just produce music for himself because he's already made enough money for him to spend, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was that creative priority that he took into play there. Stepping into your second book, was it the Indy 500 or was it your personal story?
My second book was the cancer patient memoir. And, okay. Based on, I don't know, I have an online presence and had because I was, had worked in public relations and had been, I had media, interactions. Soon after I was diagnosed, I had the opportunity and the pleasure of being, my story being told through video and through written media from some different outlets. And so people would reach out to me on social media. Typically, they were like, newly diagnosed patients or caregivers of newly diagnosed patients. And they just like, hey, can you tell me more? They have questions. They want to know more of my story. And Rich, it's been super cool, man. I so greatly appreciated that. But one thing that struck me is that, each one of these interactions is a one-to-one interaction. How can I do this a one-to-many? Then the idea of the book came up. It's like, what, I can just share this in a book and do one-to-many. And that led to, my second book, If Not Now, When, Punch You in the Face. My second book is called Me, Myself, and My Multiple Myeloma. And, it was a bit difficult to put this out there. A lot of people are very protective about your health. I don't think you talk about a health related issue without just, lifting the kimono and letting, everybody see it. Right. And so, there's having to become comfortable with a high degree of vulnerability. Like, it's like, confidential information. Hey, man, I've literally written a book about my health and, my mental mindset as I'm going into this. And I can tell you, Rich, because of this book, I've had some of the most, meaningful interactions with people. It's been an absolute honor. I've had people reach out to me from around the world: New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Egypt, Iran, Turkey, the United Kingdom, all over the United States. It's an honor. There wasn't that long ago, my wife and I were down at in Laguna Beach for a beginning of a performance art show. It's the Festival of the Arts, Pageant of the Masters, kind of a famous thing down in Laguna Beach. We're waiting for it to start, and I'm killing time on Instagram, and I see an instant message or a direct message come in, and it was a guy who had questions. He was recently diagnosed, but he was too scared to really talk about it with his wife and his children. And I'm like, man, what an honor to have this guy perceive my spaces to be safe enough for him to be vulnerable and to ask questions to a complete stranger. It really struck me. And, I was, recently a guest on a podcast, maybe about half a year ago, and the host, who also has multiple myeloma, asked me, would you change your diagnosis? And I was like, hey, man, that's a great question. And you caught me off guard, and I got to answer it because we're recording a session, right? And I'm like, I got to go with my gut instinct on this. And I can tell you, Rich, I don't want to have cancer. I would rather not have cancer, but
Sure.
I would not change my diagnosis. We all get something, and I have grown so much as an individual because of my condition, but also because of the interactions I've had with so many others with this condition. I'm a better everything. I'm a better father, better person, better spouse, as a result of my diet, of the learnings that have taken place, not because of my diagnosis, but because of the learnings that have taken place and the interactions and the engagements I've had with others, that resulted from my diagnosis. Yeah. The book, my second book, I'm proud of that book. It was a different type of book to write because it's so personal. And, again, that comes to that, there's this reticence sometimes to put things out that are too personal, if someone doesn't like it. But you know what? If you don't like it, it's not for you, whatever. I'm already happy with the engagement that I've had
Yeah.
with the people that it's made an impact for. And, I wanted this book to be, from the community, from a patient, not from some, whatever, like an academic or something like that. I wanted to be from a patient. I wanted to be for the community, for patients, caregivers, and their resources. And I wanted to benefit it. And so one thing I'm very proud of is having the MMRF logo. You spoke to this to the introduction. My net writers proceeds for me, myself, and my multiple myeloma are donated to the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. Because again, it's important for me, by the community, for the community, to benefit the community. And I'm super, super proud of the book. And like I said, I don't really care if people like it or not, because the people who do like it, it's important to them. And that's important to me.
Exactly. And that's the thing too. Like you have no idea, as you even mentioned, you have that person reaching out to you who's having difficulty coming to terms with sharing that with their family, his wife and children, and he's reaching out to you to try and get some perspective on that. The little things like that are what encourage us as a creative or just as somebody who has compassion for somebody else. Those little things are the things that kind of spur you along, keep you going just a little bit more, keep you going for another day. It's the impacts, and not everybody thinks of things this way. A lot of times creatives, we're trying to think of the biggest impact that we can make. But also too, even going back to some of that incremental business components of those little things that are ticking along, they're going to get there and do something at a certain point. But those big ideas are what propel businesses and industries.
Mm.
What I like to combine is the fact that those little increments that you're doing in a positive way that are of benefit to individuals within your community, at some point, one of those is just going to hit that big explosion,
Mm.
and it's going to create this wave that you may not even be able to see yet.
Yeah.
But I have a sense that at some point it's going to happen and it's going to take place. With shifting into the second book, were there some of that more so from your nostalgia and memory of being in Indianapolis and being with the Pacers and being around the race itself?
So you're talking about the third book or the
Was it
fourth
the
book,
third book?
actually. Yeah, the fourth book
Okay.
would be the Indy 500, the greatest spectacle in racing. Again, driving a derivative directly, if not now, when. It's
Okay.
like, come on, dude, you've thought about, just like Tom thought about that Immaculate book for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Ray, you have thought about this Indy 500 book for 40 years. Like, the book you read chronicled the 1970 race.
Right.
Things changed, and so yeah, it was like, if not now, when. Get started. I love the Indy 500. It's not for everybody. I get it, but I can tell you it is for me. Just this sheer spectacle of the sensory overload of going. If If you out there in the audience have never been to an auto race of any kind, go to an auto race. Go to the local dirt track that might be around your house, or sprint car racing. And the noise and the sound, the vision of it, the movement of the cars, you can smell it, you can taste it, and it's just it's sensory overload. And you may like it. You may get really turned on by it. You might not, but at least you gave it a shot, right? And the Indy 500, I mean, there are 400,000 people that gather around a 2.5 mile oval. It's, when I was a kid, they used to say that's the size of Cincinnati would be around a 2.5 mile oval, watching a sporting event, the largest single day sporting event in the world. And it is a spectacle, man. It is crazy. It's also a life-changing event for whatever team should happen to win it, not just the driver, but the people associated with it. And there's been 110 versions of it, or 109 runnings of the Indianapolis 500 thus far. And there's only 70 some odd winners, that can say they do that. And the people associated with that, it makes a career. It's something that, you live forever. If you're a winning driver at the Indianapolis 500, the relief of your face is on the Borg Warner Trophy. I mean, it's there for people to see, forever. So it was really cool. I've been to the race, so many times. I've had tickets. In fact, I tell people in the book where my tickets are in the Paddock Penthouse. You're ever around there and you're around the Paddock Penthouse, section 23. Look for me. I'm right at the very top, and we stop by and say hello. So yeah, I love going to the race. I love, as a kid, just to capture my attention and ignited a passion, and never got doused.
With stepping into this novel and the cover art, as you were explaining, it was something that you created yourself. Was any of that inspired by your father?
Yeah, I mean, the entire book, in a way, has roots into my father, who was a career soldier, infantryman. He was a airborne ranger until later on in his career. Then he moved into armor, and he was actually the battalion commander for the very first M1 tank battalion. It was still called the XM1 tank, experimental at that point in time. That was my senior year in high school, and when he was in Fort Knox with that. So because of him, I've always had an interest in soldiers, and I was inspired to write. I read, a lot of espionage types of fiction. While my past, I have 4 nonfiction books to my credit. I read mostly fiction, and they tend to be like espionage types of thrillers. And my wife and I, we watch a lot of shows and movies that deal with not only espionage, but also the operational aspect of it, military or paramilitary aspect of it. And so I just wanted to put those two things together, and I thought I can tell a story, and I wanted to. I thought I had a different type of story to tell. The main character in Outflank, there's 2 of them, 2 main protagonists. One is a character named Cal McHenry, a career soldier, but he's at the tail end of his career. He's 58 years old. He's spent almost 40 years in the military, and so, it's easy to write a book with a 32-year-old, action hero type of thing. But I wanted the wily veteran, the guy that's been around the block a little bit, the soldier who grew up to be an old soldier because he learned a lot of things and was able to survive it, and the other protagonist is a woman. Her name is Lily Swanson. She goes by the nickname of Tiger because the people wanted to, borrowing from the McKinsey brothers, that great Canadian comedy duo, when they talked about Guy Lafleur, a hockey player, and his Lafleur. It's like, well, isn't that French for flower? It's like, yeah, but maybe it's a tough flower, like a tiger lily, And so I wanted her to be, she's a tough person. Lily is, so her nickname, she's a tiger lily. Her nickname's Tiger, and so it's, I wanted to write a book that was also that dealt with the geopolitical environment of today, and something that's kind of like torn from the headlines. So hopefully it is. I wanted to write this book, and I call it an espionage thriller. It's right there on the on the cover, and
Yeah.
that's one of these things, man. I sure hope people think it's a thriller, because if not, how stupid am I going to feel when I have it right there on the cover? And it's like, well, that wasn't very thrilling at all. Maybe it was just a book would have been a better thing to put down there. Anyways, it's nothing ventured, nothing gained. I wanted to try my hand at it. It's a book that's sort of like, in a way, kind of pays homage to those old original Tom Clancy books. And I don't know if you ever read those books, Rich, and those out in the audience. Those are these big, incredibly detailed books. So I wanted to have that incredible detail, but I also needed to put it in a way that, was in a book that is digestible today. Because again, people aren't buying War and Peace today. This book is 240 pages long. So how can I share those kind of like details that are reminiscent of a Tom Clancy book, but also maybe do it in a bit more condensed of a way. Get straight to the story, right to the point. Have the detail in there that kind of makes it kind of cool and kind of nerdy. Details about locations, details about gear and equipment, tactics and the like. But then be able to wrap it up in a way that keeps people interested. So again, we'll see what the reviews say. Fingers crossed.
Right. I think this is going to be a very interesting episode for the creative community. And I hope they're able to see the trajectory of your story from early on and how that the experiences that you've had over the course of the years has got you to where you are and is going to take you even farther along. And also, to the quote that you have for that merch, if not now, then when. I think that's a key takeaway from this episode for the audience and the creative community, especially the creatives who are out there who have an idea and they haven't moved on it yet. And they need to step into that, because who knows what that is going to do for tomorrow, for next week, for the year to come.
Yeah.
Uh, and those are highlightable things.
Couple of things I wanted to touch on there. In the cancer community, a lot of times we'll be in a patient or a patient support group, and people just talk like, what cancer has taken away from me, and like the fatigue. I just can't do something, right? And one of the things that the community will try to encourage is like, don't worry about if you want to clean your house, but you don't have the energy to clean your house. Don't worry about cleaning your house. Just get started. Maybe just start with the dining room table and dusting it off and cleaning it up. Just get started. And when you do that, same with the creative aspect, you might be overwhelmed with like, I got this great idea, but it's like, well, but now what? You start thinking about the finish, and that's and all the hard work to get there. And it's like, oh, maybe I'll start tomorrow. Just get started, because when you begin to work on this creative spark that you have, I think you're going to find that you'll find this inner sense of peace that you've gotten started, and that you've got, it brings you some satisfaction and it brings you joy. That's what we want as humans, man. We want inner peace and joy and satisfaction, right? And when you begin to start and it's like, oh, that one's so bad, the end will take care of itself. You just got to get started, man. And then, after you started, maybe take that next step. You're not going to, Rome wasn't built in a day. We've all heard it, right? It's the same thing with your creative project. Sometimes there's these miracles that come down from the heavens. It's a lightning bolt. And this is the whole kit and caboodle right there. Bam, the whole song is written. The whole book is written. The whole painting's done. But that's usually not the way it takes place. Usually there's some stops, there's some starts, but there you got to have, you just got to keep going. So if you're out there, that's one thing I wanted to add on to what you're saying. It's like, yeah, man, get started. You owe it to yourself and the catalyst that you have for this idea. Get started. Second thing I wanted to mention is that, man, I hope this episode has been of value to the creative community, your community, Rich. But I also want to stress that if there's ever anything I can do for you, Rich, or anybody who's listening or watching, reach out to me via social platforms. My name, Ray Hartjen, spelled Hartjen. That's my handle for everything on social. Reach out to me, man. I would be honored to be able to listen to your story. And if there's any way at all that I can help and assist you all in your creative journeys, Dude, that'd be awesome. And if you happen to be a cancer patient, man, bonus as well, man, because I'll answer your call any time of day. Yeah, if there's ever anything I can do for any of you all, please let me know. It'd be my sincere honor.
That's greatly appreciated, Ray. Greatly appreciated. I think that's a fantastic place for us to round out this episode today. And one of the things that I always want to remind the audience and to tie into what you were saying is that giving of grace to yourself, of allowing the whole room not to have to be cleaned up, but just one little area of it. Give yourself some grace with that. But the way I like to end and always remind the audience is to listen to your heart, but also be kind to your mind.
Yeah, so absolutely be kind to yourself, and I like what you said. Show yourself a little grace. You deserve a little grace, right? Yeah, do that, and then maybe add one more thing in there: gratitude, man. Share your gratitude with those of you who deserve it, and you're going to find out that it's going to come right back to you as well. So,
For sure.